and I will turn on my mic so people can hear me. We would like to stand first for a moment of silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by our Vice President. Vice President Smith.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started this evening, I would like to report that, Liz, would you like to just report quickly? Well, I'll tell you what she said. She said testing went great today. She said there were no violations that were reported in any of the schools, so I think that's a wonderful way to begin the evening with good news about our schools. That's tremendous. And we know it's because you do such a great job organizing things. We would like to welcome everyone who is here tonight, and we thank you for coming. We are excited. I think tonight and tomorrow night we have two outstanding individuals that we would like to introduce to you and to the community. I will remind you, if you were here before, that we will pretty much follow the same format. We will give Dr. Pitre-Martin an opportunity to introduce herself and say a few words. Then we will, before we do that, we will have each board member just quickly introduce himself or herself. I think you have met everyone, but maybe people in the audience have not met everyone. And then we will give it to Dr. Pitre-Martin. Then we will take board member questions, and then we will go to the audience for questions. And I think we will have time for everyone who would like to ask a question to ask a question. And we need now to have roll call, please.
President Freiberg.
Here.
Vice President Smith.
Here.
Mr. Tapman.
Here.
Ms. Lee. Dr. Nelson Smith. Ms. Ware-Jackson. Mr. Freeman.
Present.
Ms. Bernard.
Present.
Mr. Arbor. Ms. Dyson. Mr. Lamanna.
Okay. We do know that Mr. Lamanna has been, his work has required him to go to Tennessee this week. He hopes to be back on Thursday. At this time, I am Barbara Freiberg. I am been on the board for about 14 months and work at LSU with a transition to teaching grant, a federal grant. And I'll ask Jill, would you go next and we'll just go around?
Hi, I'm Jill Dyson, and I'm glad to have you here. Welcome. And I've been on the board now for over a decade. In June will be 11 years, so I keep on plugging. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Red Stick once again. Dr. Pitre-Martin, I'm Evelyn Ware-Jackson. I've been on the board for 14 months as well. And I had the distinct honor of shopping you around this afternoon to the different schools. That was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure to meet you again and have some conversations with you and see how the teachers and the principals and the people at the VIPS luncheon responded to your presence today. It was an honor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Pitre-Martin. I'm Connie Bernard. I've been on the board for 16 months. I practice public relations, and I'm a graduate student at LSU. I have two children in the school system.
Welcome back, Dr. Pitre-Martin. I'm Craig Freeman. I am a proud father of 4 EBR children who are in our system, and I teach over at Louisiana State University.
Welcome back, Dr. Pitre. Tarvel Smith, Vice President of the board. I've been on the board. This month makes 8 years, and I'm an attorney in private practice here in town.
Thank you.
Again, welcome back. Good to have you with us. I am David Tapman. I represent District 1, and in my day job, I'm a government relations professional doing state and federal lobbying work.
Very good. Thank you all.
We will now give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and say a few words.
Thank you all so much, and I'm very pleased to be sitting in this chair once again. When I was with you all on January 23rd of 2012, it was a great honor, and I was very humbled to have the opportunity. To have a second opportunity, again, incredibly honored and very humbled by giving that opportunity to me. When we were together the first time, I certainly talked about a 90-day entry plan that was based on the strategic plan that has been proposed. And hopefully today we can spend some more time talking about that. Also, I think it was very evident in the first visit that I have a great deal of passion and excitement for this work. You will continue to see that same level of excitement and passion for the work as you saw then, and continuing to give you very specific things that we need to do in order to move a system that I truly believe in my heart has the potential to do great and excellent things for the children of the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. When I was here before, I talked about the fact that I used to go into the voting booth with my grandmother, and it was during that time that I really saw the importance and the power of quality education. We need to give that to every single student that walks before us in our schools. And I know that at the end of this journey, all of us have that same goal. And it's going to be very, very crucial that we come together on how we make that happen. So I look forward to the discussion this evening and all of the great ideas that will be exchanged. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I'm very honored and very humbled.
Thank you. The last time you were here, I really didn't ask too many questions, and I was the last one to ask a question if there was a question to be asked. So this time I'm going to take the lead, and I'm going to ask the first question, if you don't mind. I remember when you were here before, you gave us each your 90-day plan.
Yes.
And there were several candidates who gave us their entry plans. Mm-hmm. And I would like for you, for those of us who have gotten plans confused or failed to review our plans, and for those people who have not heard about your plan, to give us the executive summary of that 90-day plan, if you would, please.
Certainly. And it is truly a very aggressive 90-day plan, and I will be very, very open about that because I think that aggressive action is going to be needed. I have extreme work ethic, and I work very, very hard, and I will bring that to the school district as the superintendent of schools. So in that 90-day entry plan, you will see that. Some of the core areas in the plan have to do with a lot of listening, a lot of learning, but also organizing and actually implementing some key areas of change that certainly we need to take a look at coming into the school district. We know that as new superintendents enter into school districts, the first 6 months are going to be incredibly important to be able to evaluate and to determine those changes that need to be made. So as you look at the 90-day plan, I have aligned it with all of the key areas of the strategic plan that has been proposed. There are certain research topics that have been listed in the document because we know that there are key areas such as student-based formula funding that we would need to research in great detail. So a big part of this work will be phasing out the work so that we have a very specific timeline with measures of accountability attached to that timeline to get the work done. The second piece that is critical to the 90-day entry plan is communications. I really pride myself in being a communicator, and being out there talking to people will be critical during the first 90 days. Coming in as a new superintendent, I definitely have an advantage in knowing the context of the community, knowing the geography of the community, and being able to get out to the people and have conversations about
what they see as needed changes. And not only what needs to be changed, but how do we go about doing that, and we build a sense of community and vision along the way. So spending a great deal of time, and we're really talking about anywhere from 12 to 14-hour days of being out in the community to make this work. Evening events, day events, early breakfast meetings, but being out there to ensure that the community knows and we are hearing from the community is a critical piece. Another piece, because of the timeliness of my entry into the school district, would certainly be to consider any budget implications. Thank you. I've had a full day of discussing today, so I needed to get a little bit of water there. But looking at budget implications moving forward, coming into a school district in the late spring, early summer, we know that we have to have schools ready to be opened and prepared with resources, materials, teachers in place, ready to go for the opening of school in August. So certainly the 90 days, we really have to take a look at the readiness of our schools. That is going to be a critical piece of the 90 days as well. And the next piece, and I've talked about it throughout my journey today in talking to different groups, is really looking at the support system that we're providing from the central office level. Everything that we do in a school district needs to point to good teaching in the classroom. So looking at our central office, looking at how we are supporting it, how we are set up, how we are designed to be able to support schools is going to be critical during that first set of 90 days. The key for me coming into this position will be, as we go into Thanksgiving, really having several things that have been put in place, a lot of listening and learning tours that have already been completed, an implementation plan that is provided to the board with a timeline and measures of accountability, all being completed going into Thanksgiving and early December. Those things really need to be in place as we go into the January of 2013, because we know that we have to use that spring to get that next school year ready. Timing is everything, and always being aware of where do we fall on the timeline to ensure that the opening of school is ready. That always has to be at the forefront of our thinking. So I think it's important that you know where my thinking comes from and where my mind is always going to be. Are our classrooms ready? And preparing everything that we do to be in alignment with that timeline is going to be critical. So there is a lot in the 90-day entry plan, but those are the key pieces of work that I feel are necessary to ensure that the schools are ready.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Mr. Tatman and move this way this afternoon. So can y'all just make sure you turn on your mics when you're speaking, like I did before.
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. Pitre-Martin, I know you've been following, at least to some degree, the governor's education package.
Yes.
And I guess I'd like to hear from you. There are three major pieces of legislation: the choice piece, the tenure piece, which is more than that. It's a much larger bill. It has different components, and the early childhood piece. I wonder if you might speak to that a little bit. And the way I'd like to frame it, if I could, is if that legislation were to pass, how would that impact you if you were to be chosen as superintendent coming in? How might that help you, or how might you utilize that as a superintendent of the East Baton Rouge Parish School System?
Certainly. Well, I'm a strong supporter of pre-K programs, and much of the comments I've made today, as well as throughout my career, I have felt that pre-K programs are really necessary for our students to be successful. When we talk about students graduating from high school, it really starts in their pre-K experiences. So I think that certainly is something that needs to happen. And I'm very happy that Louisiana is looking at that. In North Carolina, we're actually looking at going in the opposite direction, so it's very positive to see that. I would think that the second point that you mentioned is certainly the one that I think will bring a lot of consternation to our teaching staff, and that is the change in the tenure policies as they currently exist. In the state of Louisiana, taking on the evaluation system with the tenure laws is a very compelling movement. In the state of North Carolina and other states, especially Race to the Top states, they are certainly looking at the evaluation tool and doing something drastically different where student achievement is linked to a teacher's evaluation. But then having that impact tenure is certainly a different conversation. And so to be honest with you, I'm very excited about the conversation because that is the direction that we're going nationally. The direction that we are going is to certainly link student achievement. The question, though, becomes how are we going to do that? In reading a lot of the media coverage on that particular piece of legislation, what we know is that we still have questions about the evaluation system, and is it a flawed evaluation system? The conversations that I get to hear, being a part of many phone calls with the U.S. Department of Education, is using multiple measures to determine a teacher's effectiveness. For example, looking at student observations as one of the measures along with student achievement data, and looking at more of the subjective type indicators that a principal might complete on a teacher. So we know that's an area of concern. Looking at the removal of teachers without necessarily having the documentation to support that would certainly be of question. But again, we have to always consider that the data is part of documentation. But then asking ourselves the question, do we have data over time? Do we have teachers producing data over 3 years and looking at a 3-year average of the data to see if over time they are able to produce 1 year's growth for every student they come in contact with? So the how, I think, is under a lot of discussion, but I think the goal, which is to improve teacher effectiveness, is a goal that I believe in. And now it just seems we have a lot of discussion on how we're going to get there. And then the third piece, really talking about public funds being used for voucher programs, if you will, and providing more of a private school experience for students is of concern. I truly believe that as we have taken public funds away from our public schools, it has become harder and harder to get the type of academic achievement and the true boost in academic achievement that you really could if we had the funds to do so. You know, money is not everything, but it's necessary to get key pieces of work done. So really looking at how much of public funds are being taken away, if taken away, to be used for private school experiences for students. But I would think of all the things that I've discussed today, looking at tenure laws, looking at teacher evaluations could be a leverage point, to be honest with you. Because it's a different way of looking at teacher evaluation. And this is not as a penalty, but as an opportunity for growth. And I know as I traveled the state, I've had an awesome opportunity during the month of March. We have 2,500 principals in the state of North Carolina. I've had the chance to travel the state on the Race to the Top leadership team. And we're talking to almost every single principal in the state of North Carolina. They bring one teacher with them. And we talk to them about the new standards. We talk to them about teacher effectiveness. And that's a powerful conversation to have when you now have data and you're having a conversation with teachers about how to move students. So it is about growth. It's about student growth. It's about adult growth. And I think that's what we need to focus on, because at the end of the day, over time, we will see that level of professionalism grow because we are focusing on student achievement, which is why we're here. So I do see a lot of power in that particular piece of legislation.
And just one follow-up. Part of what is being called the tenure bill has provisions in it that would require performance targets for superintendents in C, D, and F schools.
Yes.
That could somehow affect you?
Yes, oh, absolutely.
Speak about that a little?
Absolutely, and actually looking at all levels of teacher leaders, because I think of teachers as leaders. Principals are part of that evaluation as well. Superintendents are part of that evaluation as well. We all need to be held accountable for the work that we're doing. which is why I think it's critically important that when we look at central office and the behaviors within our central office, we have to ask ourselves the question, how does it support the goal of improved student achievement in the classroom? All the way down the line, it has to be. The accountability just has to be there. So I welcome that. But I like challenges, so I welcome that.
Well, good. That's all my questions for now. Thank you, Dr. Pitre-Martin. Thank you, Madam President.
Afternoon, Dr. Pitre-Martin. Following a lobbyist who follows legislation probably took a lot of my questions, but I may piggyback on some of them to nail down some specifics. But since he brought up current events, probably the most important current event since you've left, sorry, Jill, I'm going to ask this one before you get to it, is the Southeast pullout.
Yes.
We now have legislation. We don't know when it would be heard. First of all, what is your opinion about that? What's your thoughts on it? Number two, what actions, if by chance that legislation is delayed this legislative session, would you incorporate in your 90-day plan to reach out to the southeast portion? And number three, what further steps would you do as superintendent to make sure that EBR proper, excluding Zachary, Baker, and Central, remain a district, a compact district to serve the children?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm smiling because I've given this a lot of thought, because I've certainly kept up with the media coverage on that particular topic. And a few things. I think, first of all, the importance of keeping the city of Baton Rouge intact as a school district, if you will, is going to be very, very critical. And I think it's for multiple reasons. One reason has to do with the fact that, you know, currently when we think about a system of schools, we're really thinking about schools that are good schools, but they're good schools for a variety of reasons. You know, one of the things I very often say is that the quality of a child's education should not depend on where they live, that we should have good schools that really provide a variety of programs across the city. Also, we have so much diversity, and the diversity is growing within the city of Baton Rouge, and I think it's critical that we maintain that. And the city of Baton Rouge as a whole would maintain that if we could keep all of our schools. And then I think the third piece really has to do with community engagement. I talked about the fact that in the 90-day entry plan, there are hours and hours of community work detailed in that plan. A lot of it would have to be spent in that particular area of Baton Rouge, because I think it's critical that people know what our direction is moving forward. And again, it has to do with that system of good schools, where we can have multiple schools that are all excellent schools, and we can certainly learn from one another, and the importance of that diversity across a city coming together. We talk about neighborhood schools in this particular plan, and we know that that is something that many communities want. But at the same time, we know that when you have a school district of school, a system of schools, you have the opportunity to have schools in your neighboring communities, your neighboring neighborhoods that provide that sense of diversity, provide academic programming that could be similar or could be different. And so really taking a look at what we're offering to students, so that as parents are looking at schools in that part of the city, not thinking that those schools need to pull out in order to maintain the excellent quality of education they have. If anything, we should be able to put a plan in front of them where all schools are going to be improved and benefited from being within the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. And that's what I truly believe this plan could do. But our level of community engagement is going to have to increase twofold, because in the media coverage that I have seen, there is a belief that that is not there, that there is not a sense that there is a plan to provide that level of support to really extend or improve the academic programming. And so really being able to present a plan, it's not just about going out there and having friendly conversation. That's nice, but we need to walk out there with a plan of how we're going to make everything better. You know, I'm a firm believer, it's almost like when you're selling a product. When you sell a product, you have to make it so valuable and incredible that people want it. And right now, that's not happening.
Thank you, Doc. On those same lines, there is, I guess, not so much a pullout, but and you talked a little bit about it at lunch today. As superintendent, could you describe your approach? And you were here when we saw the emergence of RSD and charters, and you were over division where we lost schools, 2 or 3 middle schools while you were here. What approach would you take in working with working with the RSD in attempts to possibly get middle schools or get schools, because there are more than middle schools, back into EBR? Number one, would that be what you would want to do?
Yes.
And what type of plan would you see for those, quote unquote, I don't believe it, but low performing schools or buildings that have kids who are not reaching their potential? I don't believe in the thing is low performance school, because a school is a building.
Right. So there are a couple of things, and I did touch on it briefly a few times today, but I think one of the advantages I have coming in is because I have significant experience at a State Department of Education, is really being clear about federal and state mandates and the deliverables that are expected from school districts. And it is clear that a set of deliverables are expected from this school district, and really doing things that are, if you will, different or outside of the box in order to make that happen. Now, in many communities, it may not be considered necessarily out of the box, but, and I think I talked about this briefly when I was here before, I think the strategy of looking at a reconstitution plan and trying to just work that plan is not going to be sufficient. We're going to have to do something that is quite a bit more drastic. I've talked about the fact that charter schools are out there. We know that several of them are excellent and some of them may not be. I think it's going to be incumbent upon us that if we go in that direction as a school district, we go in that direction as a school district and have those conversations with chartering companies, educational management organizations that we know have a track record. I think that is a huge start. I think as we go to the State Department of Education and we're presenting our plan, we definitely need to have that on the table. Also, looking at our schools from a tiered perspective. I'm a true believer that when you look at where students are, simply based on what they should know and be able to do in their curriculum and in their standards, those schools where we know there is the lower level of proficiency, there is going to be a lot of significant work on content standards, working with teachers on the delivery of those content standards, and being able to provide a totally different strategy for that type of school than a school that might be a bubble school. And that's another piece that I think we need to consider. You know, certainly there is a list, and I actually have the list here in front of me of those schools that are the most pressing. But then you have the next set of schools that are the most pressing, that within a few months could be on the next list. And so constantly knowing where that target is, because it is a moving target, and being able to respond to the State Department about what is going to be that significant difference. So not only looking at those schools that are at the bottom level, but also looking at those schools that are the bubble schools. And again, looking at something that is different, like a Teach for America school, looking at a charter school. I have talked about the fact that I have seen KIPP academies work in just about every community that I've been in. That is an opportunity for us to explore. Having a group of KIPP academies servicing a certain area of the city would certainly be something that we need to consider. So Teach for America schools, KIPP Academy, looking at some successful EMO organizations are all, to me, on the table. And we need to have that ready to go, looking at those schools at the lowest tier and the bubble schools.
You mentioned Teach for America schools or personnel in your last interview, I recall. Is there anything that you have seen in your vast experience that, I guess, for lack of a better word, elevate them to a level that could turn around schools better than Louisiana certified teachers?
I talk a lot about human capital strategies, and I truly have delved into their recruitment strategy for Teach for America. And I will say that this is not the only organization that has a pretty intense recruitment strategy, but they do have a recruitment strategy that I think is in many cases is different than what you might have for many organizations. But I'm glad you asked that question, Mr. Smith, because that type of recruitment doesn't have to be done only in those types of organizations. As public schools, we can go in the direction of having a more rigorous process for recruiting teachers and ensuring that teachers are coming to us with the highest level of content knowledge. We all know that as you go into universities, you go into a teacher prep program, and you go through your coursework, and you go through your licensing process. At the end of the day, we know that teachers' level of competence may vary. It's like that in all professions. We know as individuals, our competence level will vary. So what is stopping us from having some type of a process to determine who is really at the top of their game before they walk in the door? So, I pointed to Teach for America because I have had a chance to look at their recruitment strategy and the process that it takes to just get in to that program, and then the support systems that they receive after they get into that program. There is no reason that a school district could not look at their new teachers being anyone from their first to third year of teaching, and provide them with the same level of support that a Teach for America teacher gets. So I'm certainly not saying we can only have these things in those types of organizations, but they have certainly laid out some plans for us that could be replicated.
And my last question is probably the most important question as it relates to student achievement. In your 90-day plan, how do you intend to do community outreach and bring parents to the table?
Absolutely.
I think that's sometimes we want to blame the parents, but yet sometimes as a system, as schools, we don't do enough to reach out to them and see what's going on with them.
Absolutely.
Is there a plan, or how would you approach that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Certainly, and I think I might have touched on this as well today, the importance of parent-teacher organizations, I think, is number one. In my case of working in schools, that has always been a bare bones minimum for me. When you go into a school, there should be a viable parent-teacher organization. There should be a group where parents, teachers, and community members can come together in a school and work to enhance that particular school. I'm also a big supporter of PTO advisory committees, where representatives from PTOs across, in this case the parish, would have an audience with the superintendent on a regular basis. I think that is absolutely critical. But I also think it's critical to have an audience with teachers. I think it's critically important to have an audience with principals. And that's part of that community outreach piece. So I think that that's going to be very important. Reaching out to social organizations, I know we talked about today at the luncheon, faith-based organizations, and the importance that they play in the lives of children and in the lives of families. Public libraries, places where we know we can reach out to our families and ensure that they are pulled into the work of the district or critical. But I think at a bare bones minimum, every school should have a viable PTO where we are making an effort, not 10 parents, a viable PTO, where we have numerous parents involved and working for the betterment of the school and being supported and having an audience with central office. It's critical.
Thank you, Dr. Pitre.
Thank you, Vice President Smith. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. Pitre, kind of to piggyback on what Mr. Smith was talking about, can you tell us a little bit about a time in your career when you had to rally public support for an initiative? You know, how do you work with the community, not necessarily PTOs, but the community, to achieve your goal? And if you could maybe be specific about a situation where you were successful in getting the public to help you with a goal or initiative.
Absolutely. I certainly believed, and I'm going to give you a few examples, because I really have had great opportunities to work with the community, and I think it's because I sought it out. I think collaboration and pulling people together is always critical to the work, but I don't think any school can be successful and thrive without it. You have to have that type of community involvement. But I can remember as the principal at Oakwood Intermediate School, all schools have a school improvement team. But who you have on that school improvement team is really critical, and making sure that it is not a body that is so small that it doesn't reach out to the folks across the school district. So what we really worked on was ensuring that we had a lot of representation on the school improvement team, from community members to parents to we had members of our ministerial alliance that served on the school improvement team, but just bringing in a lot of people, because what we found out happened is that those people told people, and those people told people, but in the middle of this happening, we had to increase our student achievement so people knew that we were serious. We had a lot of conversations, but people needed to see that we were serious about instruction. And then certainly as our school improved, we certainly grew our PTO, we grew our community organizations, and we started to have specific events where we would bring the community into the school. Career fairs, for example. We had sixth graders sitting in career fairs because we thought it was critically important to start thinking about their careers. And we pulled people from all over the city to be able to participate in something like that. So that's where I just really saw a great need, and we saw that it worked. It was quite successful. And then people started bringing us ideas on how to help our children improve. You know, when you have community members from biotech firms, for example, who come to the table and knock on your door with all of these resources for our science labs. And this was without us calling, saying, we heard this is what you're doing to improve student achievement and we want to help. Here's all of this equipment. Those are the kind of things that come out of just really working hard to improve community relations. So that's one important piece. And then I have to tell you, my time in Philadelphia was incredible in looking at building a sense of community. We had one of the largest strategic planning efforts I think the city had seen in an incredibly long time. And we were pulling together teams of people, anywhere from 100 to 150 people, who would come together and serve on multiple task force to address different objectives. And what was critical about the work is that we had facilitators who were district staff members, but we did not want to be the ones to provide the ideas and recommendations. We wanted it to come from the community. And we started out by inviting people, but then people wanted to come. And this is a critically important statement. We can't close the door. When people want to be involved, people are excited, let them come and participate and be involved in the process. So at the end of the day, when you're getting to the approval of something like a strategic plan that had hundreds of ideas in that particular plan, we needed to have that many stakeholders involved and at the table to speak to why it was important, because dollars were going to be attached with key parts of that plan. And so we were going to have to pull people into that discussion. And that, you know, we had over 160,000 students in the school district of Philadelphia. So it was just a huge adventure, but I was very honored to be a part of that. So I was able to see it really thrive at the school level and really see it in one of the largest districts in the country. So I feel very honored to have seen multiple ways of doing that.
Dr. Pitre-Martin, is it reasonable to expect all students to master K-12 material at the same rate? If not, how would you structure a school such that every student is challenged every day, yet no child gets left behind?
Right. Certainly no. We don't learn at the same pace, so certainly students would not be learning at the same pace either. That's the important element of a quality school. You know, certainly through my 23 years of visiting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools, and we all know what the research says about what a good school looks like. But what I have learned is that really excellent schools have a tiered approach to working with students. They don't give every student the same exact thing. We know that the content and the set of standards are there for us. We know what students should know and be able to do. How that is delivered can vary. When it is delivered can vary, depending on the student's needs. So it's critically important that all of our school leaders, all of our district leaders understand that particular concept. The second thing that has been really exciting for me, and this is actually my bedtime reading, is I'm very intrigued on how children learn. That's a very different conversation than what they learned. How students learn and being able to think about the progression of learning, and that when students learn, their knowledge is attached to something else that they learned. And it really grows from there, is really incredible to me. So in answering your question, what we have to do is give our school leaders and our teachers not only this is what the students should know and be able to do, but we've got to give them the skill set around how students learn. And the fact that you can vary that, and that is okay, but you have to have it structured, it has to be deliberate, and it has to be intentional. This is not something that happens in a very haphazard method. It has to be very well thought out. And in really great schools, that's what you see. When you walk up to that principal and you ask a question about students who are not successful on fractions, they can tell you exactly what they're doing to correct that situation. Versus a student over here who might be having trouble with a data display. He might have the fractions down, but not the data displays. So what's happening for those students who don't have data displays? That's a different conversation. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. So this is something that's very exciting to me, and I could actually talk about it for a really long period of time, but it's about how students learn and understanding that and varying it according to the needs in the building.
How will you utilize the vast resources in this community to improve student performance and teacher effectiveness? The resources available in this community.
Absolutely. Two key resources that I've always thought we needed to really enhance in the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. And one certainly has to do with the availability of institutions of higher learning within the area. Not only Southern University and Louisiana State University, but we have other universities that are within driving distance of this town that have very good teacher education programs. And so really looking at how we can join with those schools and professors in those schools to be able to provide a lot of what I just described, a lot of training about how children learn. I think it comes from a lot of those resources in those areas. Also, I have had the opportunity to see professional learning communities in partnership with universities, where universities will go into a school, and I was very fortunate as a principal to have Texas A&M University across the street from my school, and I was able to have a true partnership where pre-service teachers as well as university professors came in and were part of the teachers' professional learning community to talk about teaching the content standards and being able to look at student data. And again, it was a great resource to be able to have people who had high levels of content knowledge sitting at the table with us to sometimes kind of clear up some of the misperceptions that our teachers might have had because they had not been in school for a while or had not received that particular training. So it was just excellent to have that. The second resource in the community, and I mentioned this earlier today, the VIPS program here, the volunteer program, is really a model that could be replicated in a lot of places that I've been, to be very honest with you. When I look at the VIPS program and the power of having one-on-one tutoring with students who need reading foundation support, there is nothing more powerful than that. So one of the questions I asked today was, how do we grow that? How do we grow the number of volunteers who have some strategies in one-on-one tutoring with students, specifically in the area of reading? I have been in schools where every single student who is not at proficient and not on grade level had a personal tutor that sat with them multiple times during the week for so many minutes and ensured that areas of foundations of reading were covered in great detail. And again, it was through a volunteer program that was just really exceptional. So we have a great VIPS program here. Certainly we want to tap into that. In our institutions of higher learning here, we really have an advantage. Not many school districts have that. Okay. Sure.
Seems like we have plenty of time, so I hope you don't mind if I have extra questions. We have, Mr. Smith had talked a little bit about the schools that we have that are eligible for to go into the Recovery School District this year. So that's an immediate need, and it's really very critical and urgent. What specifically would you do immediately to work with the State Department of Education to ensure that we are able to retain as many of those students in schools and those properties as possible?
Absolutely. And I mentioned earlier about looking at some more non-traditional avenues of creating charter schools within our district to address that need, but partnering with charter school programs that we know are successful. I mentioned looking at educational management organizations. And let me speak on that in greater detail to make sure you know why I'm talking about the difference between the two. As we look at our schools and we develop those tiers and look specifically at those schools that are at the lower end, where we know there is an issue with teaching the content standards, very often our bubble schools might need support in structures and systems, for example. That is an area where an educational management organization would come in and provide that level of support. So one of the things I would certainly want to do is take a look at the current budget that has been presented to the schools that are being considered. And the reason I think that's important is because timelines, going back to my original comment, are critical. The East Baton Rouge Parish School System right now is at a very critical juncture. In selecting a superintendent and having someone who's able to look at the budget between now and June and start to really think through, are we using the money that we already have in those schools to effectively address the problem? So if we're looking at our proficiency levels who are in the 30s and the 40s, we know we have a content issue. Is that where the money is going? Those are critical questions, and those questions can be answered really in the next 60 days, to be very honest with you. So addressing that now can get us some leverage points before we go into the next school year. So that is what I think is sort of a Band-Aid approach, if you will. But the second level of approach is really looking at a different way of structuring those schools, whether it would be that charter school that we're looking at, whether it is an educational management organization that we're looking at, if it is looking at bringing in more Teach for America teachers. I mean, there are multiple ways to get to the same outcome. But I think the first strategy that needs to happen is what is going on now in those schools? How are we using the money now? What is the data telling us now to get us to where we need to be? Because when we walk in there to the State Department of Education with a plan, they're going to ask us those questions. How did you spend the money that was already given to get you to where you needed to be? And as a superintendent, I would want to and expect to be able to answer those questions.
Dr. Pitre-Martin. I know you realize that we have some challenges and some opportunities in EBR, and one of my 4 questions have been touched upon already with regard to EBR partnering with the private sector, the nonprofit, and the recovery school district by my colleagues. So I'll move on to another one. Middle school, in my opinion, is a monster. And with my experience and with my children, I'd have to say middle school is one of the roughest areas that we have in EBR. Do you have any thoughts on how we can make the middle school experience less traumatic on families and school staff?
Absolutely, and certainly, you know that middle school is my heart, certainly as a middle school principal and working with the middle schools here in the school system. And I certainly agree there are numerous challenges. I think the last time I was here, I talked about the fact that coming in, we had several of our middle schools that were below the 60% school performance scores, and we know that we had truancy rates that were high. We know that we had a large overage population. But one of the things that I have certainly had an opportunity to see, because I've been in multiple states, is really the differences in middle school structure. And many of us in this room probably went to a junior high. But to be honest with you, sometimes our middle schools look like a junior high. I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference, and in some cases, I've used the term mini high school, that our middle schools sometimes are not developmentally appropriate for our students, because very often you will see a lot of transitions during the day in a middle school. Very often we have our middle school students who are starting on the earliest schedule of any other students in the school district or in the parish. When you think about the brain research, that is not the opportune time for middle school students to be learning. So we have some things in place, looking at research, that tells us the appropriate use of time for children that are really between the ages of 11 and 13, that age span. So one of the things I think that needs to be a strong consideration, and actually we talked about it when I was here, was looking at the structure of middle school. Looking at the day of a middle school student is going to be, I think, critically important. One of the things as a middle school principal that we had to really come to terms with is that too many passing periods was not a good thing for the middle school students. And so after year 1 as a principal, we went down to 4 passing periods that were 4 minutes each. And, you know, people were like, they'll never get to class in 4 minutes. They just won't do that. But again, it became a staff accountability issue to ensure that we had people on the hallways and structured and moving kids. And then also we went to a team concept where students stayed with a set of teachers throughout the day, as opposed to moving to 7 or 8 or 6, depending on the school, in a day. So much of it has to do, I think, with structure. I think a lot of it has to do with looking at the brain research. But I do stand on the comments that I made when I was here before. I think there are system and structure issues that need to be addressed to really look at things like truancy, to look at our overage population and ensuring that they are receiving the kind of education that is appropriate for those students. I've talked about the fact that because students are overage doesn't mean they're irresponsible or they're not prepared to talk about career choices. So why aren't we talking to them about career choices? Because that might be an age-appropriate thing to talk to them about, even though they are not academically where they may need to be. They have goals, they have career, goals that they need to be addressing. So I think looking at system issues, looking at our alternative school program, and whether or not as students transition in and out from a traditional school to an alternative setting, are they missing something? And if they are, what is it? And how do we ensure that there are not gaps in those transitions as kids come and go? So system issues, structure issues definitely have to be addressed. But I think also looking at what is developmentally appropriate for students is critical as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, speaking specifically about students, how do you see a student advisory council? What role do you see that playing in decisions made in our district? Why or why not?
I think student advisory councils are an excellent idea, and I've had a chance to present and work with those in Philadelphia, just as we talked about the importance of a parent advisory council or a teacher advisory council, different staff groups. I think that students should have an opportunity to have a voice with the superintendent, a voice with the central office staff. I think is going to be of critical importance. But not only from the perspective of, let me sit with you and tell you what I don't like about my school, but as a leadership opportunity for students, I think is critical. And I would welcome the opportunity to work with students, lead students in that way. In one district, I have seen students take on projects to actually improve their school district. So it really became more than just let me meet with you once a month. It became, let's talk about how we can make the district better. We may be 15 or 16, but we can make a difference. And you know, when you're doing that kind of work, you are preparing them for the world. You're preparing them for college and career readiness. So I would certainly look forward to that opportunity and having that grow. And also, middle school students need that same opportunity as well. For all the reasons that I stated in my previous response. So yes, I would definitely support that, and I would actively work to make it happen.
Okay. One last question. What's the level of importance do you think the arts in education plays in all schools, and why?
Well, that is going to be a very personal response. When I was in school, I certainly thought that being on the speech and debate and drama team was one of the reasons that I got up every morning to go to school. It was very important to me. And I can remember in the first speech class that I took in junior high school at the time, being complimented on my ability to communicate. And those are the kind of things that stay with you and help you build your identity as a young person. And that's really, as educators, what we do. We work with students, they find out what they like, they find out what they're good at, and we're there to nurture and guide along the way. So I'm a big supporter of the arts because I know the impact that it's had on my life. And there's also so much research that talks about the ability of the arts to improve academic performance. And so as we talk about pulling the arts out of many of our public schools, we are also running the risk of missing that opportunity. I mean, we're gonna miss it because students' math skills we know very often improve because of their involvement in the arts. The abstract thinking that goes into producing art is critical. So finding a way to keep that, and just as a side note to this conversation, this is an area where community can really play a role when the funding is decreased. When you're looking at volunteers, artists in the community who want to support the arts, and so really looking at ways to pull in things into the school when the funding is just not there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pitre-Martin. Thank you, Madam President.
Well, going last, a lot of my questions have been asked, but one of the things that hasn't been touched on is the need for revision of our RIF policy, and that will become more critical as the state is looking this over as well right now, and our board did vote to delay any decisions on this until we see what the state is coming through with mandates for. What do you feel, how do you feel like in budgetary times like we have, and we're going to have to make the most of our resources, and what are your feelings with all of this? I know it's a very touchy subject, but it is one of reality. We just approved you know, regrettably, we didn't want to have to, but we did just approve it just so that we could be in that situation when we're going through our budget and have to do something that we don't really want to do. But
Certainly. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic because it is so pressing at this very time. And I know I've used the phrase teacher effectiveness a few times as I've talked through my comments this evening, but I really do believe that looking solely at seniority in terms of the RIF policy is not the direction that we probably need to be going in, to be very honest with you. Teacher effectiveness and looking at teachers' ability to move students over time is where we are headed, and we know we're headed in the right direction because at the end of the day, the student data is going to be the determining factor. So as we look at our RIF policy, and certainly as the state of Louisiana is looking at their tenure laws, what they are looking at is teacher effectiveness, whatever that measure turns out to be, being a part of that decision-making process. And I think that it is absolutely critical. And certainly when we think about the business world, because there are many aspects of the education world that are business concepts. When you look at business, they are looking at what is produced. They are looking at the outcomes. And successful businesses do that each and every day. That is how they determine their success. And so I think it's really, really critical that as we're looking at student achievement, in many ways, not all business concepts, but in this particular way, we keep our eye on the outcomes. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're going to be held responsible for.
thank you. One thing that's recently, in the time that I've been on the board, one thing that our former superintendent brought to the district that I have actually had some, I have some uncertainty about. I understand the concept, but I'm not positive of its ultimate value, is the idea that, we came up with a mandate that teachers that came on as new hires were only going to be allowed to stay at the school that they're hired at and could not make a voluntary transfer to another school site within their first 3 years. And I understand the concept of wanting the stability and the environment to be stable in some of the schools that some of the newer teachers are going to. But I also have questioned that, that policy that was put into place because I feel like sometimes it would limit a person coming at all until they could be right where they chose to be, and they wouldn't accept a position to even come and contribute to us and be a part of our big team because they're not at the school of choice for them. Maybe they live across town. Maybe it puts an hour-and-a-half commute each way with our traffic, you know, various reasons. Or maybe they really want to be a part of another team and a principal that, you know, they really want to be working with and learning from. So I have really mixed feelings about this one, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are.
Okay. Well, certainly I would want to know more, but in listening to your description, the first thing that pops into my head is the need for all of our schools to be at a place where people want to be there. Having this in place might suggest that people are somewhere for a year. It's not a good environment for me to be in. Therefore, I seek going to some other place. I think when you look at a district's climate and culture, that is one of the indicators that may raise a concern. When you have that much movement from school to school, and to be honest with you, when you have that much movement of students from school to school, and it's not always based on the need to physically move address, but students are picking up and moving because of issues that might occur, to me, that raises a much bigger issue, and it's an issue of climate and culture in a school district. And as I mentioned earlier, you want schools where the quality of the school is not going to be dependent on where that child lives. Well, we should never want a school where it's going to be solely dependent on the people in the building. We want every school to be an exceptional school and a place where teachers want to work and a place where children want to go to school. So to be very honest with you, as I listen to that, I would go to sleep at night worried about the bigger issue. We have a lot of schools where people don't want to be. And so people are getting up and they're moving and they're changing. And if we discover that is the issue, it has to be addressed. Because that, to me, is a bigger issue. It's hard to shift, but that's why it's the bigger issue. Because you're changing culture, you're changing climate in a school district. But that's the key for me. If you have a place where people don't want to be, that's the bigger issue. You've got to fix that. You've got to fix it.
Right. And you've touched on the start times, which has been a baby of mine that I have not been able to change. And I certainly have tried, and I will continue to, because I live it. And I know as a parent that, my child catching a bus at 5:40 in the morning, and he's a 16-year-old, but he's done it since he was 12. And it's just not conducive to rising student achievement. It's just not. From what I hear, teachers have even had to just give in to sleeping students because they know that they're just so tired. They're just exhausted. And so I hear across the district that now that's just sometimes tolerated. And it's just a shame because we're fighting the biological clock. And some of this is because of the too long of bus rides. And some of this is because the geographic size of the district and trying to get across town in all directions. Everybody's going in another direction. And some of this is just the start times themselves. I mean, it's just early, 7:05. So you've touched on that. And so we've talked about the Southeast potential pullout. We also have a South Baton Rouge pullout potential. There's other potentials going on. One of the ones that I'd like to discuss is the North Baton Rouge pullout. And not necessarily as a pullout, but ways that we might be creative in possibly forming a district within the district. I've, for years and years, said, ideally, I think we should divide our large district, our large geographical district, into quadrants and give every quadrant of this town all the kinds of programs and things that they could need, and that we would save so much in gasoline and expense across this parish all the time, providing services closer to home and choice within your quadrant. But what do you think about the district within a district idea and possibly looking at that in the North Baton Rouge area to create maybe a district of possible Charter 3 opportunities where people would actually want to choose those. They'd still feel a part of EBR because they'd be our charters. And, what do you think the opportunity is for there?
There are a couple of things. The first thing, I think, goes back to the need to have schools that everybody would want to be in. Because I do think a big issue with the long bus ride is because a school that might be closer to a family or to a student does not give that student what they need, and so then they have to go. So again, I think it's an issue with all of the schools being where people feel they can provide what is needed. I think the second piece, certainly for schools that are in that area that you described, we clearly have an opportunity to create some charter schools or charter school-like environments for those schools that would be something that is drastically different from what they're getting now. So I would certainly be in support of that, whether we called it a zone that we created for that group. But one of the things we've not talked about that I think is critically important is a vertical alignment of schools and feeder patterns of schools. I think is something that very often will get lost with all of the transition of people moving from here and there. I think very often gets lost. But if you have a set of schools in a certain area of the city, you have an opportunity to revamp those schools, whether it's a charter school, looking at other different opportunities in those schools. You also have an opportunity to do true vertical alignment that would prepare that child with a consistent set of skills and practices that would start in elementary and go through high school. And I know that was a conversation we were having when I was here about vertical alignment. And even though we have elementary, middle, and high school, is that necessarily the best structure to be able to provide support to schools and provide a level of consistency? And, you know, fortunately, I've had the opportunity to see districts that were set up in more of a vertical alignment method. You see an alignment in programs, you see an alignment in funding, you see a sharing in funding. And in many cases, you see a scale of work and in purchasing items where you can almost cut costs by 20 to 30% because of that vertical alignment. So certainly we could call it a zone, but I think we need to take a look at that. If we're going to totally revamp, it is an opportunity to do that. And we could call it a zone or possibly call it something else, but certainly.
I have a question. Your timeline and your 90-day plan suggests June 1. And then as you were speaking tonight, it brought up another question that I had wondered about previously, and that is our budget process. You mentioned that as an incoming superintendent you would want to be a part of, and I know that those votes take place, it seems like in May. Am I correct on that? Is it June? So it'd be really close to, I know a lot of the discussions are happening.
Happened prior to.
Yes. And so I know that so much can be done with telecommuting and all kinds of information flow that can happen prior to. Do you feel like you'd be up to, I know you'd be trying to end one position and I'm sure home ownership or what all of those things that go along with a move of this magnitude. But so my question to you is, can you be a part of, an active part of that process with us? Because I strongly feel like we're going to need serious guidance and would want to know your, and have your input and opinions on things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the, I guess, talents I have is the ability to multitask at a very, very high level. I've had a few jobs where I was in one place doing that work and then also doing the job in another place. It's not my nature to just drop the ball from one job and move on to the next, because I made a commitment to my current employer. So certainly I would see that through. But at the same time, my heart is in this. I would not be sitting in this chair if my heart was not in this work. And so I'd want to be engaged. I'd want to know what decisions are being made. This is critical. This is critical. And every strategy that is thought about needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed thoroughly before we move forward. And I would have to be a part of that work. It's critical.
Great. And I have one last, one last question, and that is, and I'm bringing up some hard issues here.
Absolutely.
And this is another one.
Yeah.
And I actually had a conversation that developed following your lunch presentation, and with a gentleman that I have grown to respect. And we talked about this current board. And I made mention that I've been on quite a few boards the way that I've been here a while, and that this current one is not as high functioning as a group, as a team, as I'd like it to be, and as I think the community would like it to be, and many involved would like it to be. And so what would your ability, or how would you help to promote us somehow getting on the same page? And I know with my training with Broad, and I know you've had it as more extensive than I have, but I know that you know, there's a lot of team building that needs to happen, and I think with a new superintendent coming on board, it would be an opportune time to help with the team building that we need as well. So just if you would, I know Broad trained us to keep the ultimate prize on the forefront, and even if the decisions are hard and contentious along the way, always keeping your eye on the ultimate goal. And so what are your thoughts there?
Well, a lot of what I'm going to talk about certainly relates to the same training that I have received as well, but I would even go a little bit deeper in that I think there has to be a set of core values and beliefs that we all come together and really know that we will be committed to moving forward. You will see that much of my convictions come from my core beliefs. Education work is very, very hard. It's very difficult work. And at the end of the day, if you cannot look yourself in the mirror and stand on your convictions, then, you know, really, why are you doing the work to begin with? So I think if we can come together regarding a core set of beliefs, which generally will lead to our core set of behaviors and goals and objectives that we can all rally around, I think the hard decisions can be made. And I think another critical part of this work is really removing personal agendas, if you will, and really keeping the children at the heart. I mentioned several times tonight during my presentation that every school should be excellent. And that really should be all of our goals, to keep every school excellent, that when you walk in a school, regardless of where it's located, you are met with a warm, inviting environment. You walk into classrooms, teachers are up and teaching, children are engaged. They're doing work that is rigorous and not 1 or 2 years below grade level, that people are really working and up. That's what I think we all want. So how do we make decisions in a way that's positive to do that? And then I think the next piece, which is really important to me, is modeling a very high level of professionalism at all times. I think is going to be very critical for my work. That is a guarantee that I can give to every single person in the city, that there will always be a high level of respect and reverence for every conversation we have about children, because they deserve it. I mean, that's why we're here. So I think all of these things are part of core beliefs and core values, and I would hope that all of us sitting here tonight would have the same set of core beliefs.
Thank
you. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
And we will come back to board members at the end. At this time, I'd like to turn to those folks who have come tonight and have been waiting to ask questions. If we would just line up and come to the microphone. And I'm going to ask that, even though we weren't always not guilty of it, please don't comment, but ask questions. If you begin a long comment, I'm going to have to ask you to get straight to the question.
Good evening, Dr. Pitre.
Yeah, good
I'm a
evening.
teacher. I teach in the district, but not in East Baton Rouge Parish Public Schools.
Okay.
I used to. Okay. In regard to the reduction in force that the school board just sent out letters for, and in light of the necessary growth that EBR needs to make in student academics, I need to ask you a question. Sometime back in East Baton Rouge Parish School System history, a superintendent was hired who did not have background in education or academics. To provide for this unusual case, a new position was created called the Chief Academic Officer. Obviously, you're going to have to make decisions about reduction in force, and it would be politically difficult to reduce those types of positions. How will you be able to do that and making politically unpopular decisions?
That's a very good question. And it's actually a question that someone asked me earlier today. And one of the things that we have to do in organizations is really look at the work and really looking at the skill set of staff to be able to provide that level of work. I have been in organizations where I have seen us try to fit people into the work as opposed to looking at the work first. So one of the things I'm very much committed to doing is looking at the level of work that needs to get done, looking at people's skill set and what they bring to the table, and being very aware if what we're looking for does not exist in this district, and being willing to look elsewhere is going to be critical. But that's why I started off my comments talking about the fact that the central office is here to support the schools. And so certainly looking at how we do that is going to be very important, but we have to look at the work and then ensure we have the people on board who can fit into that. And when I say the work, certainly looking at our strategic plan, looking at our goals that we have to get accomplished, looking at working with the Recovery School District, looking at the fact that innovation has to be a target moving forward, literally thinking about innovation differently than we ever have before, and thinking about, do we have folks in the district who bring that skill set? And so again, it's about looking at the work and placing people in those positions with the skill set for that work. And those people may be here, but I'm certainly not opposed to looking outside when necessary.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Dr. Pitre-Martin.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Behavior problems affect achievement. In EBR, like most other districts, we use PBIS as a behavior modification tool. Research shows that explicit K-12 social and emotional instruction improves behavior, ability to handle stress, decreases bullying, increases attention, test scores as much as 20%, and parental involvement, and grows resilient, confident, caring adults. I believe we have a responsibility to use every tool available to reach children and produce the best possible outcome for everyone. You answered a question at the VIPS luncheon earlier today about how to develop students' self-identity beyond the neighborhood they grow up in so they can come to believe they need an education. You said you have experience with a program called Capturing Kids' Hearts that helped students connect with teachers to create a school culture and to feel a sense of community in the building. In your experience, was Capturing Kids' Hearts implemented K-12? What type of results have you seen beyond the elementary level with explicit social and emotional instruction with that program and others? And what would you recommend for EBR on the use of explicit social and emotional instruction K-12, considering the decreasing MFP and the redirection of MFP to private entities and continued behavior and achievement challenges?
Very good. So yes, I did mention Capturing Kids' Hearts, and it has primarily been used in elementary schools, but I have seen it used in actually a couple of high schools successfully. One example I'll provide is George Bush High School in the Houston area. Relatively large high school, where certainly we felt like children should not be considered a number. We needed to be able to have children connect with at least one adult, if not more, in the building. There's an exercise that we have done with large high schools where student names are put on a dot. And so what we ask teachers to do is to go and write that student's name on a dot. And if you know that student and feel like you have a connection with that student, you can certainly go ahead and put that dot up on the wall. Well, unfortunately, what we discovered is that there were some students in the building who had no dot, not one dot. And so that program was used to enhance that type of relationship with teachers. So I think it's one of many. I'm not saying that's the silver bullet, but that is certainly an example that could be used. Also, I think looking at programs that do not have a lot of cost associated with them. When I was here and looking at positive behavior support, which I know is a program that's promoted by the State Department of Education and widely used, or it was at the time when I was here, is a program that doesn't require a lot of funding, but it does require, of course, staff training time. And it certainly requires diligence to ensure the fidelity of the program. So again, not a silver bullet. There are a lot of different programs out there that could certainly achieve what you're describing. But I think at the end of the day, to address discipline, it has to be addressing negative behaviors as well as addressing positive behaviors. Students need to know when they're doing the right thing. They need to be recognized for that. Because very often students need to know what it means to do a good job, and to represent themselves that way is going to be critical for them. So whatever those programs look like, they really have to have a combination of both. And a very important piece of all of this, regardless of the program and what you call it, is the immediate response and feedback that students receive. I've had a chance to talk about that today as well. If it's a negative behavior, if you let it persist, it is not addressed. Students who might not even think about performing a negative behavior might think about doing it because they see other students with the persistent behavior. So it's about immediate feedback. If a student is doing something that is positive, again, the feedback needs to be immediate, that those students are doing something that's positive. And that's something I know as we get caught up in the daily instruction of classroom teaching, that we may not always want to be that immediate about the feedback, but it's just critical. I've seen schools that really address negative behavior immediately and when it's lingering. And I'm sure many of us in this room have seen that, and it makes a world of difference. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mary B. Triplett, and we are the parents advocating for students' success. We are the parents, grandparents, and community members. Now, the chairman said that we couldn't elaborate or talk a little bit about what's going on, but we brought a whole lot of community people with us, and since everybody's not talking, we would ask that you let us have their time, since we do need to speak a little bit before we ask the questions.
I'll give you a couple of minutes, yes.
So, I mean, we would all have 3 minutes under the rule before.
We don't have a 3-minute rule tonight. Basically, this is just for questions, but if you need a couple of minutes to speak, we'll let you speak for a couple of minutes.
We do.
But we really do need to ask questions.
We're going to ask questions, but we still need a little time.
Oh, my name is Pearl Porter.
Hi, how are you? First, we'd like to say good evening. And we thank you for allowing us to speak here this evening. And I don't remember your name, but I thank you for the statement that you just made, that you had some hard questions to ask that you needed answers to, because we have some hard ones that we need to ask, and we need some answers to too, and some statements, Dr. Pitre, that we need to make. It may be hard to hear, okay, but we need to say them. To the chairman and to the school board and to all assembled here this evening, the next 2 days are crucial, a critical time in our lives, but moreover in our children and grandchildren's lives. The election of a new school board superintendent. Now, the first thing that we would like to make crystal clear is that our first choice for this position, and we feel the most qualified choice, still is Dr. Herman Brister. But that topic is not what we're here to discuss tonight. The topic is who is best qualified out of the 2 finalists, you, Dr. Pitre-Martin, one of the last out of the 3 pulled out. It was 3 of you all. You, Dr. Pitre, and another candidate, I think Dr. Taylor, is that correct? what is the gentleman's name?
Dr. Taylor, and I am going to have to ask you to get to your question. Dr. Pitre will be here after this meeting if you would like to speak to her, but we really do need to get to the questions, please.
We're going to get to the questions, Ms. Vine, but we need to talk too. This is about our children.
I understand
and each time
that.
we get ready to talk about it, you all want to cut us off and say, you know, we need to get to the chase now. I'm getting ready to ask you, Dr. Pitre, some important questions. But I would really like for you to know the truth about this board. But the 3 questions that's so important is, first of all, what is your take on teachers' tenure? How do you feel about school vouchers? And what is your philosophy as it relates to charter schools? But I have some other things I need to say. Now, the board said what they had to say, and I see you want to cut me off again.
No, what I was going to say is I would encourage you to ask questions that have not already been answered. Dr. Pitre-Martin has already talked about charter schools, and she has not addressed vouchers. So I would like for her to answer that question about vouchers.
So certainly we know that vouchers being discussed right now is a tenuous topic. And as I've stated before, because I truly believe that pulling out our public funds and handing them over to go to private schools, which in some cases will not even pay the full tuition for a private school education, is of a concern. And certainly, you know, we need to keep as many of the funds in public schools as we certainly can to be able to do what we need to do for our students. And so decreasing the amount of funds that could possibly go to our public schools to do that is of a great concern and certainly something I would not support. So as far as the voucher issue is concerned, and I know you had a few other topics that you wanted me to...
It limits some of the children, because if you had $5,000 and for a poor child, you're still going to need some other money. So where are they going to get the other fundings from? So then they're limited. And then the lady over here brought up about charter schools. And my thing to Ms. Jackson, which I know you and the lady had been talking about charter schools, they're not working now. Crestworth is not working. Prescott, Glen Oaks, Dalton, Lanier. I mean, how is that working for us? And then you want to take our inner schools and make them chartered. And charters are not working. I mean, a couple are. But as a whole, they're not working. And it's a lot of things I would like to say to you, Dr. Reed. I know you're more than qualified. I've read about you, and I love what we read, and I know you're qualified for the job. But if you are in a stable, good, secure job, I would advise you to stay there, because you will not have the support of this board. That's why Dr. Dearworth is not here. He couldn't get anything done because of all the roadblocks. You won't be in charge, Mrs. Pitre. It will be the chamber and the governor. You won't be in charge of this train. So you need to know all the facts before you leave where you are.
Thank you. Next questioner, please. Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam President. Dr. Pitre, thank you for returning. As it has already been instructed, several questions that all of us have had tonight have been answered. So one of my main questions for our staff of EBR is that this new evaluation plan, and I want you to try within your understanding to explain to us tonight how you will handle a 5-year, highly effective evaluation. As I attended the state legislature for this last week, it is impossible for any teacher to obtain 5 consecutive, highly effective evaluations. You talked about new teachers. This is going to affect our new teachers. It's bad enough when you come in to teach and you don't have a supportive team. You've mentioned Teach for America and everything. I would like to say 33 years ago and so forth during my career, we had the same backing as Teach for America. I feel it still exists in EBR because teachers are supposed to be mentors to new teachers coming in. I don't believe in failing kids. I don't believe in failing schools. I believe something has happened drastically to the mindset of people that are trying to teach our kids. It should have been highly effective before they were given the job to teach. So I would appreciate you addressing that. And what would you do as the superintendent when you have a master teacher brought before you that is considered highly ineffective because of the new evaluation process?
Right.
Thank you.
And one of the reasons I mentioned the possibility of multiple measures is I think that when you're making a critical decision regarding the dismissal of a teacher, there needs to be significant documentation to provide the rationale for why that should occur. So certainly when you're talking about the 5 years, that would be a concern if there were no documentation to really support the rationale for that particular removal. Also, I think, and let me just say, as I've traveled the city today, a lot of the things that we've talked about with this tenure rule, that is the one that has come up, that people have said it's going to be just about nearly impossible for a teacher to be able to meet that measure. So one of the things I'm certainly hoping is that as that feedback is provided to our state legislators across the state, that is a consideration and an opportunity for revision, to be very honest with you. I would hope that the days of information that they've been hearing, having the teachers certainly give their feedback, as well as superintendents and others, should always feed back into the process. So I'm going to hope that that certainly does happen. But the second piece of this is that as a large-scale district, I think we have an opportunity to really look at that evaluation system. And certainly we have to follow the state legislation as it is written, but we can certainly take a look at what is the documentation process that we know and that we can stand on to be able to have that conversation with the teacher. So I'm totally open to talking about additional measures within the district, things that we know are already quantitative pieces of information that we can take a look at. You will hear me use the word documentation a lot because that's going to be critical. And I've asked that question today in multiple conversations. What are all of the pieces of evidence? We've talked about the value add piece, and that's a critical piece of evidence. But there are other pieces of evidence that speak to a teacher's ability in the classroom as well. So I'm just asking for a full package of information to be able to have that conversation.
Hello, Dr. Pitre-Martin. Hi, my name is Hazel Bradley, and I have a question also concerning charter schools. Okay. My question is, in my district, District 4, I find that charter schools dismantle the public school system because the funds follow the students. Dr. Pitre-Martin, you were at the table when we tried to save Prescott Middle School before it was taken over by the state.
Yes.
When schools are dismantled, it increases high school dropout rates as well as high crime.
Right.
I know of 10 students from Prescott Middle School just last year that I saw on TV for murder. Oh. So I want to know, what programs can you implement to keep our kids in school and out of the streets?
And certainly when I was here, I became just brutally aware of our truancy issues in the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. And to be honest with you, you really at the time could just drive down the street, especially during lunchtime, and you could see the number of children between the ages of 11 to about 16 or 17 who were in school uniform, but not at school. And so we know that we have an issue. What I would like to see happen is what was started. It was very preliminary when I was here, but I thought it had so much promise to really be what I would call a regular initiative to go out and ensure that our streets are really clear of school-age children during the school day. That is so critical. When you look at the crime rate very often for our children, our school-age children, when are those activities really happening? And very often we are looking at activities happening between the hours of 8 to 3 o'clock, which is when they should be in school. So we need to go back to looking at that truancy effort that we had attempted when I was here, where we pulled in the Sheriff's Department, we pulled in the Department of Human Services. It was really a beautiful thing to watch when we really had a true roundup, where when students were picked up, it was not just for punitive reasons, but we were also addressing any other medical needs that they might have, because we had medical services that were provided as well. So we started some very preliminary work, and I see several middle school principals here shaking their heads, remembering those roundups that we fought so hard to start. But going back to that and really having those be a regular part of the work, to me, that is the only way to address truancy. You have to do those types of events regularly. And we have a lot of other school districts. Miami-Dade, for example, has done a lot of work in this area, very large district, but they found a way to pull all of these organizations together to help the kids. It can't just be on the school district, not this type of work.
Thank you.
Evening, Dr. Martin. My name is Stephen Cook, and I'm a parent in Randy Lamanna's district. I'm going to shift gear for a minute. I want to deal with the end result of proper education, and that's the development of the individual and the growth of the state. Due to the advent in technology and the global market opening up, will you cater curriculum with a worldview in mind to give our children other career opportunities? Say start in middle school, so they can, I guess, view, instead of these 50 states, the international marketplace.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm really fortunate right now because our global task force in the state of North Carolina is writing a plan that's getting ready to be unveiled. And numerous staff that I supervise serve on that global task force, really looking at a different way to provide education. And let me tell you some of the recommendations that I can already see coming out of that would certainly help when we are talking about our students in the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. For example, looking at the use of foreign languages and the requirements for foreign languages and the foreign languages that are currently being offered, and a different way of providing that instruction. Virtual public schools are really expanding across the country. In Florida, North Carolina, some of the biggest virtual schools around. This is an opportunity to provide a level of instruction in foreign languages that students just have not had the opportunity to receive. So that would definitely be a recommendation that we should look at and be able to provide. The second recommendation that I think is going to be critically important is really looking at social studies from a different perspective. Currently in the United States, when we look at social studies, we're really looking at a student's ability to have civic responsibility, to be a good citizen in America. I mean, literally, when you look at a lot of state standards for social studies, that is what you see. Shifting those standards not to read as a quality citizen of America, but a quality citizen of the world. And what does that mean? So we're talking about a total shift in the way the content standards might look like for social studies, but I think that's the direction we're headed in. It's the only way that our students are really going to shift their thinking around being a member of a global society as opposed to just being an American citizen, which we know that for many of our children in our school districts, they are going to work many places in the world, and we need to be able to give them the tools to do that. So those are two recommendations that I could actually see us looking at doing. Those are manageable things that you can do to provide a different experience for students.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening, members of the board, Madam President, Mr. Vice President, and welcome to you, Ms. Martin. My name is Mitchell Connor. I'm a member of StanfordChildren.org and a constituent in Ms. Verita Lee's district. My question to you tonight is, what do you think is the most important factor in turning around a struggling school?
Just one. There are several, but I think you're asking me to select just one. And I have to tell you, and it goes back to what I said earlier, what happens in the classroom from the time the bell rings to the time the bell rings for them to exit is going to be critically important. We know that in successful schools, bell-to-bell teaching that is teaching the content standards on grade level with rigor is the key to moving a school. I mean, that's really the bottom line. Now, we know that students have to be well behaved. We want them to be a disciplined, orderly group of individuals, but very often when you have bell-to-bell instruction, that is solid instruction, it diminishes a lot of the discipline issues that you're going to have in a school. You want to have an outstanding facility, but I will tell you that I have gone into schools that may not be the most high-tech facilities imaginable, but with quality teaching going on in the classroom, the school had incredible achievement gains. Now, what is going to undergird all of that is strong leadership. And it's strong leadership coming from the principal. It's strong leadership coming from the central office that can support the needs of the school. You know, at heart, I think on many days, my head is still there in that principalship. Because when a principal needs to get resources to a child, they can't wait 3 months to get that resource to a student. That intervention has to be provided as soon as possible. And so I work with that sense of urgency every single day. So I think everything just has to be targeted to classroom instruction that is just superb, bell to bell, tight instruction for every single student. And it has to happen every single day.
Okay. And I have one other question. You as the superintendent, how will you bridge the gap between the CEOs of the charter schools? You know, what will you do as superintendent to make sure everybody is on the same sheet of music? You know, we're all...
You have to hold people accountable, and it cannot be a once-a-year check-in. Accountability measures have to be constant and ongoing. That's a very different element of the work. And in many ways, I'm just so thankful to have gone through the Broad Superintendent's Academy because it provided me with the opportunity to see the superintendency in a very different way. Being able to work with charter schools and educational management organizations and being able to provide them with metrics that you expect them to meet monthly, quarterly, yearly metrics that have to be met just to be honest as you would in your schools is really the key. You know, we do the postmortem, which is when the test scores come back at the end of the school year, and then we judge if a school has been successful. But to be honest with you, if we have the correct performance metrics in place, we should know if we're going off course way before the end of the school year. And those are conversations that will have to be held with charter schools to ensure that we're on target. I mean, it's constant, but it has to be done.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Pitre-Martin. My name is Raymond Allman, and I am a proud product of EBR Public Schools, Prescott Middle School, and Scotlandville Magnet. Also a husband to a highly effective teacher here in the district, and a father to 2 students ages 12 and 17 here in the district. Voter in Randy Lamanna's district, and come to you as a representative from Stand for Children tonight, really asking 2 questions that parents have. The first is, what is your vision for central office and how they should support schools? And the second question kind of dovetails on that, and it asks what percentage of the district's income should be spent at the school level rather than central office. So the first question, what is your vision of central office and how they should support schools? And then what amount of funding should be allocated to schools versus central office? Thank you.
I think that is an excellent question because one of the things I've done in preparing for my meetings with you all is to really take a look at staffing. And the fact that when you look at a district this size, we have about 5,000 employees, and 50% of the staff are teachers who directly touch children each and every day. And so that begs the question of should our percentage, which I would say, yes, we should have a larger percentage of staff members who are actually touching children every single day. Let's go back to the skill set question that I talked about earlier. I have heard throughout my administrative career, lean and mean, that central offices should be lean and mean. And what that means is having people with the ability to do multiple things, and that multitask ability is going to be critically important for many reasons. So to your point, looking at the number of staff we have in the district and the number who actually work with children, I think is going to be a critical piece of work. To be honest, I've already started looking at that because that's a critical question. And then looking at the support systems in place for teachers and other staff members who directly work with students, and how their skill sets, again, can be assigned to the work that we need to get done, which, again, is a hard conversation to have, because then it's about the work, it's not about people. And I want to repeat that. It has to be about the work, and not necessarily about names of people. And so I want to make sure that that is clear. So all of those things would have to be done in reorganizing a central office.
Good evening, Dr. Pitre-Martin. My name is Brent Beatty. I'm a teacher here in East Baton Rouge Parish. I have agreed with almost everything that you've had to say tonight, and I appreciate you coming to East Baton Rouge Parish. There's one thing that you've said that, quite frankly, scares me.
Okay.
And that is, and my question has to do with Teach for America.
Okay.
As a certified teacher, I went to school for 4 years. I learned pedagogy. I learned alternatives to classroom discipline. I learned about differentiating instruction. I learned how to identify students with learning disabilities from students who lack motivation. I learned how to tell a student with learning disabilities from students with personality disorders, and how to deal with both. I learned things in a 4-year course of study that Teach for America never touches. Okay. Your endorsement of Teach for America scares me. Okay. We have a charter school system in the East Baton Rouge Parish that uses a lot of Teach for America students.
Okay.
Recently, they had a student hang themselves from the bleachers of their football stadium.
Okay.
It scares me.
Okay.
Can you please address my fears? Thanks.
Certainly. And of course, as I've said with a lot of things tonight, this is not a silver bullet. But what we are talking about is looking for solutions to move our schools and looking at solutions that might be different. Because at the end of the day, we still have to hold everybody accountable to the work and having quality work presented. So in looking at some of the training programs and looking at some of the skill sets of many of the Teach for America individuals that I have had the opportunity to work with, I have seen a high level of skill, and that is where my comments are coming from. Is every single program that is going to be presented without any faults? I would never ever sit here and say that, sir. So I do want to be clear that as we are talking about those types of recommendations, what I'm really saying is that we're going to have to hold everybody accountable to the same set of standards. But let's just take a look at some programs that we have seen some skill that might be present and see if it fits the situation that we need. That is the bottom line, because I think as we all sit here as educators, we all want to move the school district. But again, if we look at a recommendation that does not fit our needs or is questionable, as you have stated here tonight, then that may not be the option we need to take. So that's why it's important we need to hear from you all regarding recommendations that we want to make. I think that's going to be critical. We have to have that level of collaboration.
Okay, we'll take this question and then we'll turn it back to a board member and have some closing remarks, and then we have two. Okay, that's it. After those two, that's it. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is James Finney. For 2 more months, I'm a parent of an East Baton Rouge Parish student. I have a 2-part question, but they're short parts. First, how young would you suggest starting students in public school if you were creating a public school system from scratch? And second, how would you divide the students by grade level? Elementary versus middle, junior high, high school, whatever. Thank you.
Yeah, ooh, I really love your second question because I've had the chance to see a couple of variations there. But to be honest with you, it would be a wonderful world if we could have structured educational experiences for all of our students at the age of 3, to be very honest with you. And being able to really provide them, even if it is a half-day experience at that age, and then continue all the way through 12th grade. It would be absolutely wonderful. So that would be my wish list for all of our children. I think the second bit of information really has to do with the developmental appropriateness of age groups and students being together on a campus. I will tell you one configuration I've seen that really has worked is to have students on a campus where you have a pre-K program, then you have kindergarten through 4th grade, having 5th and 6th graders together on a campus, 7th and 8th graders on a campus, and then your high school students. Now, that can be a costly venture, but you can see the benefits to doing that. We know that on some of our junior high campuses, you could certainly have a 6th grader who is young, 10, almost 11 years old, who's on a campus with a 14-year-old. And I think sometimes for our parents, that is seen as too big of an age difference during a very trying adolescent period. So there are different configurations, but I think at the end of the day, if the vertical alignment is really there and it's a tight vertical alignment, you can overcome some of those things, which is why I made the comments I made earlier about looking at more vertical alignment in our schools, not only where they're located, but the programming that we're providing as well. That's an excellent question.
Thank you, Noel Hammett. Thanks for being here, Dr. Pitre-Martin. My first question, and it's just a kind of a two-parter. The first one is, what % of student achievement, as measured by our standardized test, about what % do researchers believe is directly attributable to the school and the classroom teacher? And secondly, do you believe it's fair to talk about failing schools, the terminology that's out there, that are simply based on the absolute scores of students in those schools and have nothing to do with measurements of growth or with what's actually happening in those schools?
Okay. Well, I will definitely take the second question first because I feel very, very strongly about absolute performance not being the measure for whether or not a school is improving. I think it has to be growth. And looking at where a student is when they walk in the door, and after having multiple opportunities with teachers, where are they at the end of the school year? And I truly do mean the end of the school year, because I know very often we are taking tests earlier and earlier in the school year, feeling as though we don't have enough time to get all of the standards taught. So I think a growth measure is certainly the way to go. When you look at most states and they're looking at using some type of test data with a teacher evaluation system, most of them are looking at some type of a growth model. I know in North Carolina we are, and certainly here looking at some type of a growth model. So that certainly is the direction I would want to go. But then also, again, when we're talking about the percentage of that test data that can be directly attributed to children's academic performance, that is a topic that people are struggling with across the country in trying to associate that direct correlation between what the students are getting. Because to be honest with you, we know that students learn in multiple venues, multiple places. We know that in many of our homes that our children are in, they are in content-rich environments. And so they're reading, they're discussing, they're learning in their home, but they're also doing that in the school environment. So to be honest with you, Mr. Hammett, I think researchers are struggling with that. And for me to give you an exact percentage, I mean, I would probably make a lot of money because I know there's so many researchers that can't figure that out. with a great level of clarity right now. So I would really struggle with giving you a percentage, because we know that children get learning in many different places. But we would like to think that as they come into that classroom and they're with us for several hours during the day, we should be able to make a significant difference.
Thank you. We will turn back then to board members and Ms. Bernard, and then if you had a question, Vice President Smith.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with this one, and it's about customer service. Who are the customers, and how do we approach customer service? Could you hear me? Who are the customers, and how do we approach customer service?
I think certainly everyone. To be real honest with you, I know I've talked about the fact that schools need to be welcoming, they need to be inviting, and that's to everyone. Community members who want to come in and work with us, junior achievement sponsors who want to come in and work with us, they need to see that our school is a welcoming environment. Students need to be treated with a high level of respect. Parents need to be treated with a higher level of respect. At the luncheon today, I talked about the fact that as the superintendent of schools here, I truly believe that the East Baton Rouge Parish school system can be one of the highest performing brands in the parish, meaning that when people hear the school district name, it can be associated with quality. I really believe that. Otherwise, I would not be sitting in this chair. So that's what customer service means to me. You know, having all of our staff members really feel a sense of pride. Our students feel a sense of pride in their work, and representing ourselves that way is going to be very, very critical, and it has to start with the superintendent.
My next question, you talked a little about human capital. Our teachers and our staff are our greatest assets. How can we incorporate these measures of outcome of student performance and still be sensitive to the morale concerns that come with the federal policies?
And that's where I think the support and growth aspect of the mandate really needs to be highlighted. The evaluation process is being looked at in every state across America. But at the end of the day, how do we use it to help teachers improve and provide the support? We can't always use this type of information as a hammer. We cannot. So that means, what do we have in place to be able to provide that level of support? In many organizations I've been in, we have not always had something prepared that was intentional and deliberate to address a need that a teacher might have. If a teacher raises their hand and says, I am struggling with technology, we should have something prepared to share with them to assist them in improving in that area. And so it is about support, and it really is about sitting and using it as a growth opportunity for all individuals, and not just for teachers, but as we said, principals are part of this, the superintendent is part of this. All administrators should be a part of an evaluation tool that deals with growth and development.
And Vice President Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Pitre, I want to follow up on something that Ms. Dyson mentioned, creation of zones and vertical alignment. In a perfect world, and I guess pre-desegregation days, that's how school systems were run. I could probably name every community in this district. The one I represent, years ago, you had a pretty relative flow pattern. Winborn Elementary, Howell Park Elementary, Dalton Elementary. You went to Prescott Middle School, and then you went to Estrema High School. Scotlandville, pretty the same way in that geographic area. And the same in the Woodlawn community. However, I do agree with that, and I think that's perfect for the concept of neighborhood schools. But as superintendent, if you want to tackle that and go back to that, how do you balance that with choice? Because the area that I mentioned with the Estrema area, it's labeled as failing schools. And there is a provision in No Child Left Behind, which is a federal, I don't need to tell you that, you know that, requirement that says if a child is in a district that goes to a failing school, then the school district has to offer choice.
Correct.
In sum, how do you balance neighborhood schools with choice, especially as it relates to, I don't want to say kids trapped in a failing schools, kids that aren't meeting their academic potential?
Right. And as you look at the strategic plan in talking about neighborhood schools, that has to be what I would call a long-term goal. And the reason I say that is because in order for us to really get there, we have to provide parents with the insurance that all of our schools are quality. That really is at the core of this. If that is not in place, then in good conscience, we cannot just go ahead and say we're going to shift to this particular system without having the proper supports or the documentation to provide to parents that clearly says this is a quality school, this is the level of programming that your child will have in the school. So to be honest with you, when I look at this strategic plan, I certainly see that as a long-term goal because many of the other things that we've talked about regarding zones, if you will, those are things that have to be addressed. Because if we don't use those as an opportunity to drastically improve schools, we will never have the ability to offer that level of neighborhood school. We just won't. So one really has to precede the other, in my opinion.
Thank you, and thank everyone who was here tonight and the questions that were asked, and thank the board members for their attendance. I know you must have a lot more energy than I do because you and I started at 7 o'clock this morning, and you've been talking since 7 o'clock this morning and answering tough questions, and I've just had the pleasure of listening. But I would like to give you a couple of minutes to make any final comments you would like to make to us this evening.
Thank you. Well, once again, I have very much enjoyed being with all of you and really answering the tough questions. A very, very important decision will be made in the next few days. And so I feel very honored that you all have taken the time to ask a lot of tough questions and to certainly look at the candidates' backgrounds and experiences and determine the best fit. I truly believe I am the best fit. I bring really two distinct advantages to this chair. One is I have the context of the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. I'm from Louisiana. I know the geography of the state. I know the geography of this school district. And I also have the rear view mirror, if you will, of knowing some things that certainly have occurred and also the opportunities here for growth. So that's definitely opportunity. The second advantage I have is bringing to the table multiple ways of doing things and being able to be in organizations that have varied in size from 10,000 students all the way to 160,000 students, and now working at the state level where we have 1.5 million students that are preparing to get a new set of content standards for every single content area next school year. So I have seen some things in multiple states, done multiple ways. And so bringing that to the table is, I think, a very nice combination, to be very honest with you, to be able to present context, but also different ways of doing business to get to the same outcome. So I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I have a great deal of passion for this work. I'm a smart person. There are a lot of things that I could have chosen to do with my life, but I decided to be an educator because we all know that if we don't get this right, the economic vitality and the quality of life for all of us will not be there if we do not improve the quality of education for our students. So I thank you again. I look forward to seeing you again, and I look forward to the opportunity to take this journey with you. Thank you.
I would entertain then at this time a motion to adjourn. The workshop is adjourned.